Hello everyone, happy Tuesday, and welcome if you're watching on demand as well. So I hope you've all had a lovely day. It's very hot here today. I don't know don't know what it's like where you are at the moment. We've had lots of messages this morning, Victoria, about sports days and heat and what to do in that situation and all sorts going on. So it's very busy in school at the minute. So I hope that you're all well and you're dealing with the heat as well as you can do. You guys are in for a treat today. I don't normally get excited about books that come through my door, but honestly, I've known Victoria, we've known each other for a long time now, haven't we? And I've always been really inspired by your work, Victoria, to be completely honest with you. I've always loved what you do. And the dog is crying now. I don't know if you can hear him. And Victoria has written the most amazing book called The Neuroinclusive Educator. And I'll just let Victoria chat about it while I just briefly let the dog out of the room. Otherwise, he'll cry all the way through. Hang on, bear with.
Oh, bless. We all know about animals, don't we? And their needs. Yes, so the book, I've got my copy here too, is a really easy to read, easy to follow guide to creating the classrooms that all our little humans need in order to thrive, whether they're 3 or whether they're 20. This is the principles that apply. So over to you, Lucy, back again.
Well, I was sorry about that, everybody. That was Bramble. So basically, Victoria's book is really transformational because it talks to you like on a personal note. And I think that's really interesting. So right at the beginning of every chapter, it says to you, where are you on your own journey? Whereabouts are you? What do you know about this thing that I'm about to explain to you? Have a little think about where you are, and then I'll signpost you to which page you need to go to. So that's number one I really loved. And then number two, I also really loved the fact that not only is there the theory behind what the chapter is about, so there's a lot of research gone into this book, but importantly, because we're all so busy in this mad world, Victoria, there are strategies on how to use it in the classroom. So, you know, I think you get the message that I really like the book. And as an inclusion lead for 14 years and trained SENDCo, I can completely understand and see the relevance and importance of such a fabulous book. I mean, it's one of those things that I think I will read over and over and over again and go back to, refer to. It'll be like a little special book on my shelf behind me with the planners, and that says a lot because it's so helpful. It's got case studies, it's got strategies for more inclusive practice. I absolutely love it. Congratulations, Victoria. Superb.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been an absolute labour of love. There's 11 years worth of research and trial and error in that book, and an incredible editor, I have to say, at Bloomsbury, who really helped me along the way to really keep the reader in mind, obviously with their years and years of experience of designing books that people really, really want to read. So thank you. But thank you also for your support, because I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for your early support in my work. So thank you. It's much appreciated.
Oh, it's amazing. And you know, and also I'll say one more thing and then I'll let you carry on with your training, but also I think if you're an experienced SENDCo, or if you're just starting out, or you're a new leader and you don't understand how to be a neuro-inclusive educator, then this book is going to help all of you, really. I mean, I'm an experienced SENDCo and I will refer to this. So congratulations and well done. And today you're going to be chatting to us about Beyond Difference, which is going to be a really helpful session. And just for those of you who have not met Victoria before, because we have done a few things together before, but if you haven't had the pleasure of listening to Victoria before, I'll just briefly give you an introduction. So Victoria, you are a Cambridge graduate, a teacher and a neurodivergent educator who works with schools, universities, NHS teams, local authorities, and global organisations, if that wasn't enough, to help deepen the understanding of executive function, neurodiversity, and neuroinclusive practice. So, as I said earlier, you guys are in for a treat. I'll let Victoria share her slides.
Fantastic.
And I will be around to help with questions at the end. So if you have any questions you'd like to ask, that's what the community is here for. We all help each other. No question is too small. Please do ask, because you've got myself and Victoria on the call today. Please do say hello as well. It helps us to know we're not talking to ourselves. I shall be sharing some links for you at the end. And also we've got a really good special offer on, haven't we? So if you want to buy the book, you can get 35% off. I'm not paid to advertise the book, by the way, everybody. I just really like it. And I really mean that. I really do like it. So hopefully I've made that clear. So I shall hand over to Victoria and I'll see you in a bit.
Oh, thank you. Oh, Lucy, I've got goosebumps. Thank you so much. And no, I haven't paid her anything to recommend the book, but it is just so heartwarming to hear how it is going to make a huge difference to SENDCos, to leaders, to your average classroom teacher. Not that there's such a thing, because we're all different. But it is just so wonderful to hear that it's out there in the world. And if you place your order now, I think they're beginning to send out copies, which is exciting, but the official release date is not till the 13th of August. So let's get on with our slides today. Today we're looking at beyond differentiation, looking at designing learning experiences with natural human neurodiversity in mind. So this is my specialist topic, and I'm so excited to share what I know with you all today. So our presentation is interactive. So if you are joining us live, please do get involved in the interactive element, because that will help me to speak directly to the audience about what you're experiencing. So it would be wonderful to do that. But if you are following the recording, the QR code and the Menti links won't work. So don't try and use those. But if you are live with us today, please do get involved, because it would be wonderful to have you on this journey with us. So you can either go to menti.com and type in that code 44814905, or you can use the QR code on your screen and you can log on there, and that should take you directly to the Mentimeter. Fantastic. Okay, lovely. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. My learning objectives for today are that we'll understand that every classroom is neurodiverse. Secondly, to recognise why differentiation alone is not enough. Thirdly, to understand how universal design can help us design for access to learning, to education. Fourthly, to identify barriers to learning as rooted in something called executive function, which you may or may not be familiar with. And then finally, to become familiar with Neuroinclusive practice framework, which is the practice framework that's in my book. Just the resources, if you're interested in what you've learned today, please do purchase a copy of the Neuroinclusive Educator with Bloomsbury. There's print, there's ebook, there's audiobook, which I recorded myself, so you get to hear me speaking the book. Which is a very emotional experience. I hope you enjoy it. It's only £4.50 for the audiobook, so really reasonable and really great resource for driving to and from school or on your commute. And that's due out on the 13th of August. But as I say, some of the hard copies are getting sent out already, because I know they're in the warehouse, which is very exciting. So if you go to bloomsbury.com and search for the Neuroinclusive Educator, you get 35% off with that code NeuroInc35. So that's 35% off with that code NeuroInc35 on bloomsbury.com, not on Amazon. They're selling it at just under £20, but you can get it for just under £14 if you buy it from Bloomsbury directly. Super. So just going to start off by just checking our Mentimeter is working. So let's just describe the children that we support in 3 words. So just choose 3 adjectives to describe these children. And this will help create a word cloud for us. Let's see what we get. Okay, so we've got the first ones that have come in. We've got chatty, and they've got diverse needs, but they're clever, curious, and smart as well. And I know it's a busy, hot day today, but it's lovely to see so many of you engaging. So thank you so much for that. We've got unhappy, anxious, and fed up. Yeah, such a variety. And what I always love about this slide is that it just really helps us to recognize that all the children that we support are diverse, but also the way we experience those children is diverse too, because of our individuality as human beings. And so there's no right or wrong answer. It's just about recognizing that diversity and the diverse ways that we interpret those relationships as well. Super. So a little bit of an introduction to me and why I'm here speaking to you about executive functions today. So my name is Victoria Bagnall. I am neurodivergent. I have a diagnosis of dyslexia, but I also have ADHD and ASD, or autistic traits as well. Despite all of that, I did manage to get to the University of Cambridge to read geography. So I'm living proof that you can be intelligent and be neurodivergent at the same time. I'm a qualified secondary geography teacher, so I know what it's like in the classroom. I've also taught in middle schools as well. I'm also a mother. I've got 3 gorgeous girls, all neurodivergent in their wonderfully different ways. And I'm the co-founder of Connections in Mind and an organisation called The Code, which offers executive function aware tutoring. I'm one of the trustees of the Learning Skills Trust and also an advisor to the Divergent Schools Group, as well as this year I co-founded International Executive Function Coaching Certification, which is an international regulatory body for executive function coaching. And I've written a book, which Lucy was wonderfully talking about earlier, which is so lovely. So it's due out on the 13th of August, but I do understand they are sending out copies already, which is super exciting. So that's a little bit about me. If it will let me move on to the next slide, that would be nice. Why is it going stuck? Oh, here we go. Super. So we're going to start off with a quick module on neurodiversity, because I think it's really important just to make sure we get a terminology right. I often hear leaders and experienced people working in SEND using the terminology incorrectly. So I just want to make sure that we are clear on the terminology here. And I always like to start off by thinking about the history. I may be a geographer. That was my my undergrad degree. But I'm also able to apply a historical lens to things too. And I think it's really important to look at the history. We do this in the book of how do we get to where we are today? And we have a system whereby there's assumed that there's all these normal children, which mainstream school has been designed for. And then there's all of these other children who have different diagnoses of differences in their brains that are abnormal, that some of them needs can be met in mainstream, but a lot of them need to be in special schools. So that's the kind of the situation we're in today. And that's based on this assumption that scientists and doctors had for many, many years of trying to understand the human brain. And they assumed that the human brain was like other organs, that it either functioned normally or abnormally, and those abnormalities could be categorized. And so what they did is they categorized the symptoms of those abnormalities. So we've got autism spectrum disorder was a collection of symptoms. ADHD is a collection of symptoms. Dyslexia is a collection of symptoms. Dyscalculia is a collection of symptoms, etc., etc. So they collected these symptoms together, but there was never found like an underlying cause or a way of definitively diagnosing these differences. So it's really important to remember that as we go through these next few slides. But in the last 30 years or so, we have had the technology now to better understand the brain. We've had these fMRI scanners, which have allowed us to scan the brain and to understand better about our nervous systems and our brains and how they interact with each other. So all of the things that I'm going to show you on the next few slides are irrevocable facts in the neuroscience, okay? All neuroscientists will agree to things on the forthcoming slides. So the first is that there are 100 billion neurons in our brains, thereabouts, and all of those neurons connect together, some with even 1,000 different connections. So that means there are literally trillions of different ways that our human brains can be wired. Trillions of different ways. And that's a kind of mind-boggling number of ways, isn't it? We also know as an absolute fact that from before we are born, everything we experience shapes our brain and how it takes shape over time. So it's we are very adaptive to our environment. That's what's made human beings so successful as a species, is because our brains are very, very adaptable to our environment. So from those two facts, we can deduce that there is only one certainty about brain development, only one thing we can be absolutely 100% sure of, that every single human brain is different, completely different. Even identical twins who have the same genetics will have different brain wiring. It's absolutely 100% certain that that will happen. So no two brains will ever function in exactly the same way. They will always be different. So neurodiversity is this fact, this biological fact that all brains are different. They are. It's a fact. And then we have our distribution, which, as you'll know, if you're into mathematics or geography or other statistical subjects, you'll know that all populations tend to fall into kind of normal curves. So what we have in this diagram is this, this group of people in the middle who are closest to the average of that diversity, who we identify as neurotypical. They seem to be more similar to each other than those neurodivergent people in the yellow sections, okay? So it's really important to remember that even within that neurotypical area, all of those different brains are different and function differently. But the more we kind of go towards the edges of that normal distribution, the more we have people who diverge more from that average, okay? They're just as human as everyone else. They're not broken. There's nothing wrong with their brains. They just don't, their brain doesn't work in a very similar way to other people's. It can work in a myriad of different ways. Okay, so we've got this idea of neurotypical, so that's people who are closest to the average, and neurodivergent, people who are kind of furthest away from that average. It's really important to remember that neurodivergent people live with the burden of society's expectations. So what happens is because society is designed for those neurotypical ones, the blue people, it's assumed that everyone will function in that way, that that's normal human behavior. So that's how society is designed. But neurodivergent people have this burden of society's expectations because society expects them to behave in the blue way, but their brain isn't wired to do that in that way. And so what we tend to get is we get neurodivergent people who are highly capable. They seem to be highly capable. They people please. They put other people's needs ahead of their own. And they tend to be crippled with perfectionism because they're desperately trying to live up to this ideal that feels beyond reach for them. So they live with this expectation, the burden of these society's expectations. You may or may not be familiar with the neurodiversity movement. That's where this terminology has all come from. So the neurodiversity movement rejects what's called the medical model, this idea of this normal versus abnormal brain, which is now completely recognized as factually incorrect. There is no such thing as normal brain development and abnormal brain development. There's just human brain development. We would also reject this idea that people who have who are neurodivergent are disordered, and that they have deficits, that their neurodivergence is a hindrance to them, and that they need fixing to be more normal. We reject all of those things in the medical model in the neurodiversity movement. And instead, we embrace the understanding that human variation is natural, okay, that it's just a natural part of how humans develop. And it's a difference, just the same as we have different hair color, eye color, skin color, height, weight, all of these different differences. We have different ways that our brains are wired, and no two human brains are wired in the same way. And there's an evolutionary reason for it, because it helps us to adapt to our environment. So if you have people who think outside the box, they're more likely to be able to survive in environments that are new. So it's really beneficial to societies to have people whose brains work in a different way than their predecessors, so that they can adapt to environments and pioneer and do things differently. And that's why the human species has been so successful on planet Earth. But what we need to recognize is that society's biases, the judgments we make about people who struggle to meet society's expectations, is disabling. That causes problems for those people, and it's hard for them, and it makes their lives more difficult to lead. And actually what needs to be fixed is society and all of society's systems, including schools, health services, organizations. That's why I work across all of these different areas. So we need to fix society, not the individual. So here is some of the evidence that this is playing out. Okay, so we have, first of all, criticism. We know that from this study, that ADHD children received 20,000 more negative comments. Excuse me. Got a frog in my throat. Excuse me. By the time they're aged 10. So that's a huge number of negative comments by the age of 10. Oh, there we go. I needed a bit of sweet tea to soothe my throat. Thank you for bearing with me. In terms of life expectancy, this is really sad, because we know from the studies that women with ADHD live up to just under 9 years less than their neurotypical peers. So if you have a diagnosis of ADHD and you're a woman, you are likely to, you on average die 9 years before your neurotypical peers. Not because your ADHD kills you, but because of society's biases that disable you and make it harder for you to live your authentic self. And this is really, really sad as well, about death by suicide. It's particularly hard for me because I have autistic traits myself, and I have 2 autistic daughters as well. Is that we know that if you have autism without an intellectual disability, and the two often get conflated, that you are 9.4 times more likely to die by suicide. So that's not 9%, that is 900%. And for autistic women, it's 13 times higher. So that's 1,300%. And that's a huge number. So it's really, really important that we recognize that the way that our current society and systems are working is actually harming neurodivergent people, and we need to fix society. Those neurodivergent people are exactly the humans they have evolved to be. So in summary, the only certainty in brain development is diversity. There is no such thing as normal. No 2 children you teach will ever think and behave in the same way. And neurodivergent people face discrimination and harm. We've seen that in the statistics, haven't we? That early death, and death by suicide. Neurodiversity is something to celebrate, not to change. Okay, it's not about making people normal. It's about celebrating the fact that we have a school full of people who think and behave in different ways. So let's move on to differentiation now. And I'm going to put IEPs in there as well, individualized education plans as well, because I think it's really important to look at why the system that we have currently is not working, and why it feels so hard to accommodate all these complex, relatively complex needs, or these diverse needs, I should say, probably, in the mainstream settings. So in terms of differentiation and IEPs, it tends to be presumed that the needs are fixed, that once a child has a diagnosis or has been evaluated, that here are some strategies that will work with that child no matter what. And it seems fixed. And the idea is that the teacher will then deploy the strategies for the child in each lesson, and that will help them to learn better. And when you're a teacher and you've got your normal children, as you've been told that they are, and you've got all your children with their IEPs and that need specific differentiation, often it can feel super overwhelming. It can feel like, my goodness, I've got to do all these extra things for these children. And it can feel particularly overwhelming because it doesn't always work. It doesn't always land. And often the child doesn't want to be made to feel different from their peers. And so it's been this very strange situation where SENDCos have been writing these IEPs, but they don't get used in classroom. Excuse me. I'm really struggling with my coughing. I'm just going to take another big sip. Hopefully it'll go away. Fantastic. It's also really important to remember that brain function is really complex. So it's not like if you work out a strategy that works for you, that it will always be the case. We need to remember that our brain is constantly scanning the body and our environment to work out whether we're safe or whether anything in our body system needs to be changed, because that's the job of the brain, is to balance what's called our body budget. And when our body is out of balance, whether we're tired, hungry, thirsty, feeling lonely, feeling disconnected, all of these things, if we're out of balance in any way, access to our brain's CEO, our prefrontal cortex, where our executive function are found, is limited. Okay. And that's where we can do our learning as well. So as soon as our body gets out of balance, our brain prioritizes getting it back into balance and away from that kind of higher order executive functioning and learning. We've got the hand model of the brain now. I just want to show you this because it's such a great model. And I know I've used this before with Head Teachers Chat, so bear with me, but it is so good. And if you're new to this, we find this really useful. So this is based on Dan Siegel's hand model of the brain. And this is a really simplified model of the brain, which helps us to communicate with children what's happening when they don't have easy access to their prefrontal cortex, to the executive functioning. So because they find it difficult to access learning, they're difficult to engage, difficult to stay concentrated, difficult to get things done within a lesson. So what we've got is our hand like this, to make the hand model of the brain. And we fold our thumb across the palm of our hand like this. So you can see that, and you've got a knobbly bit of your thumb that sticks out. So this is our amygdala. And then we've got our cortex and our prefrontal cortex here. So you've got this hand model of the brain here. And what that is that's the whole brain state. That's when we can do our learning, when we can engage socially, when we're feeling relaxed and able to be our authentic self. So that's that whole brain state. Now, if the amygdala senses any type of threat, whether real or perceived, we flip our lids and our prefrontal cortex gets disconnected from the rest of our brain, and our instincts come into focus. So it rebalances the body, moves away from that threat, or rebalances the hormone levels, or whatever it is that's become out of balance within the brain. And this can take milliseconds to happen, but it takes on average 20 minutes for that prefrontal cortex to come back online. So it's really important to remember that the brain, we don't always have access to our executive functions in a static way. That's why differentiation with specific strategies hasn't worked in the past. It's also really important to remember that there are all sorts of individual differences as well. So we've got trauma, we know, impacts the development of the prefrontal cortex and executive functions. So if a child has experienced lots of ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, that impacts their ability to access their prefrontal cortex. But also hormone levels as well, which vary hugely between different individuals. And it's more of like a Venn diagram. So it's not like just the two genders, and then you've got like separate hormones there, but actually it's more of a Venn diagram. Everyone kind of crosses over. But everyone has different levels of hormones, and they fluctuate depending on how much we've slept and etc. So hormones play a huge role in executive functioning too. All of these things on the screen have been proven in the science to impact our brain functioning, especially our executive functioning. So when we feel safe, then our prefrontal cortex can be online. When we exercise, when we feel connected with others, when we have fun, when we experience joy, when we are calm and do mindfulness or yoga or go for a walk in nature. Sleep is really important too, as we well know, and food as well, making sure that we've got a balanced diet and that we are eating complex carbohydrates that slow release over the day. I think a lot of us live from one sugary snack to another, and that can leave us with troughs in terms of our blood sugar glucose, which affects our brain function as well. So having those slow release carbohydrates helps to keep the carbohydrate levels and the energy levels up within our blood and our brain. So it's no wonder that teachers feel overwhelmed, because they're presented with all these different children with all these different diverse brains, and all of these different things can be changing all the time. So it's impossible to plan a lesson to meet the needs of the children that are going to be in front of you in that moment. You just can't predict it. You just don't know what's going to come through those doors or how it's going to evolve throughout the lesson. So in summary, every single child in every class is unique, and our brain prioritizes our survival. So if our brain is out of kilter, if it's out of balance in any way, that impacts our ability to access our prefrontal cortex and to learn. So even the same child won't have the same needs in each lesson, okay? Because it will shift and change depending on all of these different things that are going on. So it's actually impossible for one teacher to predict the needs of 30 plus children. It just is impossible for that to happen. We can't predict what's going to happen in that moment. We need to be able to adapt to it in that moment. So on to universal design now. Normally when I'm doing this in person, I ask people to put their hands up and tell me if they've heard of universal design before. And it always shocks me how few teachers have heard of universal design. So if you're nodding along now, that's brilliant. But I think a lot of you won't have heard of this before. So I'm going to go over what it is. So we have already established that each child is unique and changeable, right? Depending on their hormones, whether they've slept the night before, what they've eaten recently, whether they're feeling lonely. So many things can impact what they bring to each lesson and each activity within that lesson. So universal design came from architecture, but it has been applied to learning. So I'm not the first person to do this. People have come before me, but I'm picking up on this because it's such a great tool. So universal design is the design of buildings, products, or environments. So we're talking about the environment, the learning environment, to make them accessible to people regardless of age, disability, or other factors. So it's all about designing for access. And it's a cycle, okay? So it's never finished, it's never complete. It's just something, it's a mindset that we have, that we're constantly thinking about. How are we making what we offer accessible to all people? And if not, how can we make it better? So first step is to consult with stakeholders. Is this feeling accessible? And if it's not, what are the barriers to access? So let's just talk about those. Let's get them out in the open. Then let's design some solutions to help remove those barriers and get them out of the way, because actually then everyone can access it. That would be great. Then let's test and iterate how that works and see how it works. And then let's implement it so that the next lot of people coming through, the next year group, don't have to face those barriers. They're just not there for them. And so that's removing those barriers to learning. So I want to know, what barriers to learning do your students face? What makes learning hard for them? So just think of a few things. What do they find difficult? Okay. Right, so we've got a few things coming up here. One is remembering instructions. Another is behavior. That's a common problem. We know that it's in the headlines all the time, isn't it? Listening, sitting still and reading. The environment can be a barrier, the sensory environment. Yeah, if it's too noisy, too loud, too bright. Are they able to concentrate? So all of these things are barriers to learning that we commonly face. And this is one I prepared earlier. So here are some of the things that teachers have told me in the past are the hard things. I should say teachers and students have told me in the past. So first of all, it's attention and listening. So the executive function skill that is the barrier there, the one that haven't developed yet, is sustained attention. Then we've got following instructions. That's to do with working memory. That's an executive function skill too. We've got behavior and regulation, because a lot of behavior that we see in school is because we're not emotionally regulated. That's to do with emotional regulation and response inhibition. Those are both executive function skills. Independence and getting started. So that's task initiation and planning. Finishing, that's to do with time management and goal-directed persistence. Connection with prior learning, because you've got to kind of layer on your learning, haven't you? So you need that cognitive flexibility to connect the dots and to see where the previous lesson connects with this one. That's to do with our cognitive flexibility. That's an executive function skill. And also sensory sensitivities. So we can all feel sometimes that things are too noisy, etc. But if we have good emotional regulation and cognitive flexibility, then we can adapt our environment and we can advocate for what we need. But if we don't, then that can become a real burden to us. Okay. So I'd like to know, how familiar are you with executive function skills? I've talked about them a few times today. This is my specialist area. But I'd like to know, how familiar are you with executive function skills? Fantastic. I know we've only got a few people online today, and lots of you are going to be watching the recording. I should imagine most of you are around this area as well. Got a little bit of knowledge of executive function skills, but it's always room for growth and development. So you're probably familiar with the fact that executive function has now been included as one of the 5 areas of child development in the SEND reforms. It's a proposal, it hasn't been confirmed yet, but I was so excited to see it there, because it absolutely deserves to be up front and center in this wheel of areas of child development. You may or may not be aware that executive function challenges, so difficulties with executive function, are listed in the literature as co-occurring with all of these different diagnoses. So we've got ADHD, autism, Tourette's, depression, anxiety, dyscalculia, dyspraxia, dyslexia. So all of these things overlap. And so I always say to teachers, it's transdiagnostic. And if you're trained in executive function, it means you can meet need in all of these different areas. So at Connections in Mind, we recognise that there are 3 core brain processes. There's our working memory, there's our inhibitory control, stopping ourselves from doing things we instinctively want to do, and our cognitive flexibility, switching and changing our thinking depending on new information. So that's what the brain does. Those are the 3 core brain processes. But we work with 11 executive function skills. I'm not going to go through all of them now. They're listed in the book. Many different times in different ways, so you can look them up. They're also listed on our website as well, but all of these different skills require the prefrontal cortex to be working optimally, for that prefrontal cortex to be on board, to have that whole brain state, and for us not to have flipped our lid. What was really great to see in the SEND reform proposals was that the government recognised that executive functions are shaped by experience, which means they're developmental, but also by environment and relationships as well. That is absolutely key. They are not static, as we've talked about earlier with the flipping the lid, right? We don't always have access to them. We need to feel safe. We need to be well fed. We need to have slept well, all of these things. And we need to feel those strong bonds of connection in order to engage our prefrontal cortex. So in terms of this universal design cycle, this is how we can apply it in the classroom. So consulting stakeholders is about asking what feels hard right now in that moment, because you cannot predict. You haven't got a window into that child's brain, and you've got 30 children in front of you, so you can't be able to guess what's going on for all of them in that moment. But you can ask them. You absolutely can. And then if they have the language, because you've taught them about executive function skills, they can then talk about what's feeling hard at the moment. Are they struggling to pay attention? Are they struggling to start the task? Are they struggling with their cognitive flexibility because they're thinking about something from break? Are they struggling with their emotional regulation? All of these different things. What is getting in the way of them getting down to the work at hand? And if they've got the language, then they can talk about it easily. Then, so that helps us to identify the barriers. Then it's about designing solutions with them. So instead of the teacher having all these strategies that they are going to deploy without consulting with the students, actually brainstorming strategies with the students, put them out there explicitly for everyone to cherry pick the ones that they want to try. And so you get this wonderful collaborative environment where children are being empowered to think about all the different things, and they're hearing all of the different strategies that their peers are using as well. And they love nothing more than learning from each other, right? So then we test and iterate. That's about the student experimenting with that strategy. If it works for Sally, does it work for me? Oh, actually, it doesn't work for me. What other else? Maybe Salim's strategy will work for me. I'll try that one. And so figuring out through the process of however many years within school, which are the strategies that work for them to get them to be really strong in those different executive function skill areas. And then finally, it's about using those strategies without the teacher even having to prompt it, because they know that they're going to be able to access the learning better, and they felt empowered to use the strategy. So the strategies don't sit in the IEP. They don't sit in the teacher's plan. They sit in the child's knowledge of themselves and their ability to deploy those strategies as and when they need them, both in school, but also at home and in the workplace in their future life. So this is a huge investment in their independence and being a self-starter. So in summary, universal design is cyclical and never complete. We need to keep doing it all the time. So every lesson should have universal design in it. Universal design requires us to look at the barriers to access. And many barriers to access are actually executive function skills. Not all of them, but the vast majority of them. The universal design cycle can be used in every single lesson. And that's what we talk about in the Neuroinclusive Educator. And then that empowers students to adapt their own learning. So the teacher can still teach the topic, can still set the task, but the students are being trained to adapt their learning in ways that work for them through all of the steps that I talk about in the Neuroinclusive Educator. And I'm going to go into those right now. So neuroinclusive classroom practice, which is what we talk about in the Neuroinclusive Educator, is a blueprint for high quality adaptive teaching and learning. So moving away from differentiation, and how do we actually adapt teaching and learning? And you'll find that really brilliant teachers in your schools are already doing these things. That's the beauty of this work. It's about really pulling out what that actually looks like and being able to quantify it. So there are 6 professional standards in this framework. So we've got the neuroinclusive mindset. That's having that understanding that all children are different and all their brains work differently and they all behave differently. And being curious and compassionate and never judgmental about that. Then it's about tuning in. We're going to come on to kind of how we break this down, but it's about helping them to understand when they're becoming dysregulated, when that prefrontal cortex is beginning to flip off so that they can get it back on again. If they're not aware that's happening, then they can't have any hope of getting it back on again. Then it's about settling them, using our own calm to settle them into a good learning rhythm. Again, good teachers do this by instinctively. Then it's about naming the barriers to learning. What is getting in the way, so that they can say, this is feeling hard for me. I need some strategies, and we can have a brainstorm and strategize together. That's number 4. And then it's about reinforcing that, because we want to reinforce those strategies so the ones that are working for them become part of their toolkit that they can deploy whenever they need it. So let's dig into it a bit more. First is tuning in. So tuning in is all about developing our 8th sense of interoception. Now, this is not me talking about some woo-woo thing that I've kind of dreamt up. Interoception, go and look it up in the literature. It is our 8th sense. It sits along things like our proprioception see, now my working memory is gone. It sits alongside our proprioception, which is to do with our ability to feel ourselves in space. And then we've got our balance as well. That's another sense. And then we've got our 5 senses. And then we have interoception. Okay, got it out in the end. So we've got this interoceptive sense, which is massively undeveloped in our culture, because we don't tune in to what our bodies are telling us. We've become disconnected from our bodies. We've become disembodied, and we've become far too much in our heads and not enough in our bodies. And there is so much research to show that when we develop our interoception, we help build our metacognition. And if you're across the Education Endowment Fund's research, you'll know how much, I think, 8 months of progress that metacognitive work adds to child development. So that's huge. So tuning in is really important. Developing that self-awareness and knowing when we need to start using our self-regulation strategies is really essential. Then it's about settling. It's about having that empathy and understanding that the child is struggling in that moment, and that we need to use our calm to help them to go back to calm so that they can engage their prefrontal cortex and get on with their learning. So that settling is absolutely key. Then it's about naming. So using that executive function literacy every single day in assembly, in every lesson, in communications with parents, in chatter in the staff room, in communication with governors, with education psychologists, all the way through the day, using this executive function terminology to talk about the behaviors that we used to judge. And we used to say, that's laziness, they're defiant, they're being manipulative. Instead, reframing that as executive function skills that need to be developed, that we can support them to develop. For younger children, we've developed these 11 characters that go alongside the executive functions. But for older children, you can use sports personalities, you can use famous people, or they can come up with their own wonderful characters. Here we've got See It Through Sam. He's the one, he's a dung beetle, and he keeps pushing his ball of dung, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. No matter what comes up in his way, he keeps pushing his ball of dung. And he's got great goal-directed persistence, which is the same as resilience or grit. And so he's got a whole kind of story behind him. And so do all of these characters as well. Then we have collaborate. So collaborate is all about strategizing with the children using a technique called mental contrasting. I'm not going to go into the details of it now. You can read the book. You can do some more training on that. But mental contrasting helps us to look at what is that barrier, to talk about that barrier, and then to brainstorm solutions to that barrier that are going to help everyone who's listening to that conversation. And then finally, it's about reinforcing, about feeding back to the students about where they're using those strategies and how that has assisted them in doing better in their learning, so that that's reinforcing. That's not just shallow praise. It's about reinforcing that they've used a strategy and it has led to a different outcome than if they didn't use that strategy. Then the brain is more likely to be receptive to using it next time until they can use it independently. And then they've built that habit for life. So in summary, we serve our children better when we design for diversity. So neuroinclusion isn't something you add on. This is something that you incorporate from the beginning. You design for diversity. It's not about teachers doing more. It's really important to understand that, okay? This is not about you designing 30 different lessons for 30 different children. It's about adapting in the moment, but having that pedagogy where we're empowering children to adapt their learning in ways that they know work for them in the moment and they can sense what they need. It's about helping children to discover how they learn and apply this in their learning. It builds independence and resilience, another thing that the government would like us to do more of. So I'm sure you're wanting to know where you can read more about this approach. So here you can take a screenshot of this if you like. So we've got 7.5 lessons about the brain. It's all about the brain and how it actually works. So dispelling a lot of myths about the brain. Dealing with feelings is all about self-regulation and co-regulation. He talks a lot about co-regulation. David Yeager is all about motivating young people from 10 to 25. But if you're in primary, the Kate Silverton book, There's No Such Thing as Naughty and There's Still No Such Thing as Naughty, are brilliant. You can see that in the top corner there. And then we have the Smart But Scattered series of books. So there's one for teens and one for kids. And then, of course, there's my book, which brings all of this together and in a really digestible way for teachers. And there's an audio version as well, so you can listen to it in the car on your commute. So you go to bloomsbury.com, search for the Neuroinclusive Educator, and then you can use that code NeuroInc35 to get 35% off before publication date, which is on the 13th of August. And then it will arrive for your summer reading, which is really exciting. So just as we finish off, I'd just like to remind you that we are here to help. So we are a non-profit organisation and we exist to serve our neurodivergent community and to help build a more neuroinclusive future. We offer 2 routes of specialist training. So we can come into your school and do a talk about executive functioning, but I always say that's just the beginning because one talk will never be enough. But we have 2 routes of specialist training. One is the Neuroinclusive Classroom Practice, which is what the book's all about, but also we have that executive function coach as well. The government's talking about these experts at hand. So an executive function coach is an expert at hand that would be able to come in and offer support one-to-one with children or in small groups to help them with their executive functions. So for the Neuroinclusive Classroom Practice, we have 2 pathways. We've got the standard pathway or the early years foundation stage pathway. So that's early years and key stage 1. And that's because we're working with kind of discovery learners in that section. And then they're growing towards mastery learning as they go from key stage 2 upwards. And so we can apply different techniques. So there's 2 pathways. And with the early years one, we've got more on the characters. Of course, that wouldn't be so relevant from key stage 2 upwards. Then we've got, in terms of format, it's 3 2-hour live sessions and 1 hour and 15 minutes of self-study. So very achievable to get within your kind of CPD hours for a year for a member of staff. And also our pricing is really affordable too. So because we know it's really important to have as many teachers as possible trained in this approach in a school because they need that kind of cross-fertilization, the price for 1 teacher is almost the same as price for 6 teachers, and they each get a free copy of the book as part of the training. So it's $6.20 for 1 teacher, but $7.40 for up to 6 teachers. Okay, so you only just have to pay the extra books to get them up to 6 teachers. We only have 3 spots left, 3 school spots for 6 people for the October and November training for the standard, and we have a few more for the early years pathway. Or we can come in and do a whole staff inset, which is that price there, $1,495. And all these prices are ex VAT. VAT is added on top. The executive function coach training for schools is has a huge array of standards, professional standards. It's a standalone profession on its own. You're looking at coaching skills, the neuroscience and executive functions, the effective use of contact time, growth mindset and goals, flexibility and adaptability, relationships, reflective practice and development, use of technology to support practice, and then boundaries, client protection and safeguarding. So it is a standalone profession and it's regulated by the IEFCC, which is an independent non-profit organisation. And it's setting the standards globally for executive function coaching, protecting quality, ethics and public trust, and recognising demonstrated competence in 28 standards. So anyone who has completed our training is then independently evaluated by the IFCC to see that they have met the criteria. So you can be rest assured that there's a high quality service. So just a quick thing to say that I am massively active on LinkedIn. I spend a lot of time on there. So please do look me up on LinkedIn and connect with me. I'd love to connect with you, but also you can search for Connections in Mind on Facebook or Instagram as well. I'd love to connect with you there. And I think in a moment we're going to discuss what we've talked about. And if there are any questions for everyone. So I hope that has all made a lot of sense and there's a lot of people been nodding along.
Wow, amazing. I told you guys would love it. It's absolutely fabulous. I was just busy trying to get a banner on the screen that said the website address for you, but for some reason it's not allowing me to share it. But so if you would like to head over to Victoria's website, it's connectionsinmind.com. And honestly, you know how I feel about the book, but actually, whilst you were chatting there, Victoria, I was thinking about what I had been reading in the book and how practical it is. And a lot of what you touched on, I had picked up on in the book. And one of the really lovely things I really loved, and I thought, gosh, I would definitely do that in my classroom, was the after lunch activity, where they come in and they tune into their body and they think about, how fast is my brain working today? Am I Speedy Bunny or am I Slow Tortoise? And then tuning into, you know, how my brain is feeling. But then secondly, when you go into that teaching of the lesson, how fantastic and how amazing are your conversations going to be when you're thinking about, well, what are my barriers to this? You know, the teacher has, picture the scene, the teacher has introduced the session, and they are about to say, off you go and do your task. But before they do that, imagine that rich conversation your children are going to have in your school if they just pause and say, what's going to be tricky about this today? What are you going to find a challenge? How could we overcome that challenge? Could we talk to each other about how we can overcome that barrier together? What are you going to use today to help you to achieve that? And imagine if that over time they all learn, actually, that was a barrier, but I resolved that myself. I did it all by myself. How much more confidence are they going to have? And how much more are they going to love being at school, enjoy their learning? I mean, the impact on the school overall as a community will be huge. Just that 2-minute conversation. I think it's fabulous. Well done, Victoria. I really do. I really do love it. So yeah, fabulous. I don't think we've had any questions come through, but if you do have a question afterwards and you think, oh, I should have asked Victoria, don't panic, because we can contact Victoria ourselves. If you message us, we can pass that question on. And I really do recommend that you have a look at the courses that Victoria's got on offer, and also the book, obviously, and have a little peek and see what you think. And we'd love to hear your thoughts, wouldn't we? You know, tell us what's working well in your school. How are you going to integrate these strategies in your school? And when you do, share them with us. Tell us what's working well. Let's help each other. You know, let's make our education a better place for all our children. Wouldn't that be great if we did that together? So yeah, thank you so much for joining us today, Victoria. Really, really insightful, super conversation.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's so lovely to share it with you all. And yeah, I just think, you know, I spend a lot of time observing lessons of people who are applying these things in practice, and just seeing those beaming faces of those children who are able to put their hand up and say, oh, I'm struggling with my task initiation, I'm going to try this strategy, or I'm struggling with my emotional regulation because of something that happened at break. To be able to communicate that and not have to hold it in and to keep it in because they feel like they can't communicate that. They just love it. And it's transformative. It really is.
Oh, I can see it. It's exactly the strategies I would have used myself in school. I think it's fabulous. I think You've nailed it, absolutely. And how you've described it as well is very easy to take on. You know, you could literally pick this book up this afternoon and go into the classroom and try something out and see what happens. But so thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and we hope that's helped. Underneath this video, if you are watching on demand, or even if you're not watching on demand, we will be putting all of Victoria's links that she shared with us today. So if you'd like more information about the courses link will be there. Don't forget your 35% off the book. It's worth tapping into that. That's quite a lot. And also buy it from Bloomsbury direct because Amazon's more expensive. Yeah, so hopefully that's all helped. And if you have any questions, please do get in touch. It's been really lovely to be with you all today. Thank you so much, everyone. Cheerio.